is a respected nuclear physicist and lecturer. He's been involved in investigations and the exposure of US government cover-ups for more than 38 years. Please welcome to Midday, Stanton Friedman. Welcome, Stanton.
Pleasure to be here.
Do you believe in UFOs?
No, that belief is for people in religion or politics, I guess. I'm a scientist who's been collecting data for 40 years, and I'm convinced the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft, that we're dealing with a cosmic Watergate, some few people in governments know, and that none of the arguments made against those conclusions by a small group of noisy negativists stand up under careful scrutiny, and we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. This is the planet Earth by aliens and cover-up of the best data, bodies and wreckage, for 51 years. So belief has nothing to do with it. Evidence has everything to do with it.
You talk about evidence?
Yes.
What is it?
Well, in my lectures, I always start with 5 large-scale scientific studies, and I ask after each one, how many people have read this one? If I'm lucky, it's 2%. In England, 3 of 7 lectures, nobody had read any of them. So evidence should always be the place to start. That doesn't keep the noisy negativists from, doing their research by proclamation. There is no evidence. That's a lot easier to say than, oh, I didn't bother to look at it. One of the studies covers 3,200 sightings done for the United States Air Force. Over 600 could not be identified, separate from the ones for which there wasn't enough information. A quality evaluation showed the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. In other words, if you look at the characteristics of the best cases, clearly they're manufactured objects. I don't mean little blobs of light in the sky. That's not very useful. Whose behavior indicates they had to be made someplace other than Earth, because if we could make things that look like that and fly like that, up, down, back, forth, 10,000 miles an hour in the atmosphere, right-angle turns, without noise, exhaust, all that sort of stuff, we wouldn't be building F-16s, 17s, 18s, MiG-29s. What's important about a flying saucer is the technology. They can fly circles around anything we got flying. If it wasn't built here, it was built someplace else.
But the evidence?
Well, we have eyewitness testimony. We have over 5,000 physical trace cases from 65 countries, and they're dull after the first 200. These are where people see saucers on or near the ground, and after the saucer leaves, one finds physical changes. And you can compare that dirt, if you will, or vegetation with nearby dirt, and see differences that you cannot explain other than by some very exciting sort of things happening. 1,000 of those cases involve reports of beings associated with the craft. We have 3,500 pilot sightings collected by a retired NASA scientist, Dr. Richard Haynes. 45 countries, and they're dull again. The same thing is happening all over the world by people you trust with your lives when you fly in airplanes.
But if so many visitations have happened, and as you say so many pilots have gone, oh, don't know what that is, there's a UFO, why don't we know about it? Why don't they introduce themselves?
I don't talk to the squirrels in my backyard. We don't know that they haven't introduced themselves. There are all kinds of stories floating around about, for example, a saucer landing in Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico in 1964. Aliens getting out, military guys going over, shaking hands, and walking off together. I've talked to 2 people who claim to have seen the footage shot of that event. I haven't seen it. So we don't know what the government knows. But clearly the aliens' purpose in coming here is not to appear on talk shows, not to land on a White House lawn. They're here for their own purposes.
You were one of the original civilian investigators of the Roswell.
The civilian original investigator. Yes.
Investigator. What happened at Roswell? Well,
condensing 20 years of study, and I've been working on it that long, which seems utterly ridiculous for one case. As far as I'm concerned, 2 alien spacecraft had a mid-air collision, demolishing one, exploding into little pieces, debris coming down 85 miles northwest of Roswell. The other one almost intact, but with a big gash in the side, coming down 100 miles west of there. Both were found. New Mexico is a very lightly inhabited place, almost as bad as Australia. There aren't many people around. The first one, a rancher found this wreckage. He reported to the sheriff a few days later. Military go out, grab everything. The cover story goes out. There was headlines. Major headlines, Army captures flying saucer. That was in the newspapers. There we go. That's Roswell Army Airfield, not Royal Australian Air Force.
As the investigator, did you see the spacecraft?
I didn't get involved until 1978. This happened in 1947, but I've talked to a lot of the top military people who were involved. Remember, the military group involved here, and balloons everybody throws, must have been a balloon. It wasn't a balloon. Crash test dummies. That's one of the silliest explanations for this reason. They did drop crash test dummies in New Mexico, but not until after 1953. This happened in 47, and they were all the size of pilots, 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, and nobody who described the bodies said anything other than little guys, skinny little guys, big head, no ears, no crash test dummy.
So all the people you've spoken to read the Roswell incident say it did happen, but the government said it didn't happen.
Well,
we see that alien footage. We've seen, you know, the famous bit of footage about the autopsy.
Yeah, I've met with
True
the
or false?
exploiter of the film. False. Putting everything he told me in our first conversation was a lie. I mean, except for that little bad start, you know, and it was downhill from there. I can't tell you who made it, but there's certainly no reason to relate that to Roswell.
Do you believe there have been alien abductions?
Yes. I've worked with some of the top investigators of abductions who collectively looked over 1,000 cases. I'm convinced a number of Earthlings have indeed been abducted, but every case has to be taken on its own merits.
This document you bought, you retrieved from the CIA?
Well, it's a long, tortured procedure to get documents in the United States. You file a request, they turn you down, you appeal, they turn you down again. Sometimes you go to court, sometimes not. This document took me 5 years to get. It's a released CIA UFO document on which you can read 8 words, not very useful words, you'll notice, info location, info date, USSR, and a bunch of numbers. Even the security markings are not there. This is what happens under freedom of information. National security is a reason for withholding information. Of course, they say there's nothing classified about UFOs. Well, except for all those classified documents you can't get.
Fascinating. You don't think people think you're out there?
No, I'll tell you, I've given over 700 lectures all over the world, 14 countries. And I judge by the questions at the end of the lecture. I've had 11 hecklers and 700 lectures. And you get that many if you talk about religion, sports, politics, show business, whatever. So the response from my professional colleagues is what I value the most, and they've been uniformly good.